A right proper name, first presented in Exodus 3, verse 14. According to Austin D. Searles, Making Sense of the Divine Name in the Book of Exodus, from Etymology to Literary Onomastics. A very long title, but a scholar has the very best monograph on this divine onomastic at this present moment. A 2015 PhD dissertation that even challenged the position of his immediate supervisor. And I believe he succeeded quite admirably in that challenge. A challenge asserting that this Exodus 3:14 presentation of the divine name was the very first presentation of the name in our earliest manuscripts, as well as being the virtual presentation of the name in our final manuscript. A name implying I am, I was, and I will always be. Or simply implying him who is, who was, and who is yet to come. If you happen to like some sort of beginning and end consistency. A name possibly implying the much more limited Hebrew of him causes to be more limited. If that puny figure to the extreme right of our very first letter is actually an aleph. Yes, that mysterious figure that we haven't fully spoken to yet. An awkward aleph, yielding an incredibly awkward if that aleph were to be the actual case, yielding a privative verb to be found absolutely nowhere in Scripture, yielding a highly awkward not God. So, while this aleph is indeed a remote possibility, it is not a plausibility. No, according to Searles, you should strongly consider the onomastics of this remote possibility first, which is to say you should strongly consider the vocal impact of this before doing any of those wild vowel gymnastics. Gymnastics that are not seen anywhere else at any time with his divine name. Despite all that, all parties involved agree wholeheartedly that Yahweh is rightly to be considered the proper name of the Lord. A right proper name immediately followed by that expositional claim of I am, that I am, in that very same Exodus verse. Properly expositional, just in case you might have thought that he was not that legendary I am, I suppose. That he may not have been some other, that he may have been some other, some lame sort of Yah that you might find in Egypt, and abbreviated or abridged. A lame descriptive, alluding to an earlier Egyptian Yah, perhaps, sort of like that yam scam spoken to earlier. However, at this point, Yahweh was going to show them the real Yah, the Yah of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a Yah that will do exactly what he says he will do, when he says he will do it. No yeah buts about it. With the operative point being that Yahweh is indeed the one and only I am. One and only I am. The God of all gods, and there are no comparative gods, not even in polytheistic Egypt. Still, a name greatly expanded from the basic Yah of those earlier pagans without any historical reference to God, for God whatsoever. Pagans without the historical El or Elohim referent, a referent revealed primarily to the Hebrews. Rather, it appears those Egyptians were just making reference to some hypothetical eternality, to some God that only seemed eternal, as in the yam of the sea. a reference at a time when that prospect of an eternality had not been formally revealed to them yet, since the Word had not been fully revealed yet. Not fully revealed in the Greek sense of ego amai, at any rate. A highly specific, God-honoring revelation of the name that is fundamental to a healthy eternality. Since it is said that unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. Not a very healthy way to die. A way that leaves you open to eternal judgment. Not good. Not good at all. So, to repeat, this particular Yahweh in this third chapter of Exodus is very likely the very first official revelation of the divine name in our Hebrew Bible. That is, if you take Exodus 6, verse 3 literally. With earlier mentions in our Bible being more generic, with earlier mentions likely being your generic El or corporate Elohim. Yet it is clearly in this chapter of Exodus where we have a distinctly original insertion of the name that is generally translated as Lord by our respectful English Bibles, with that lowercase Lord being used as a lesser nominative, denoting a position rather than a person, but a nominative largely translated by respectful Bibles as Lord, out of respect for tradition, Jewish tradition. Right? Whereas disrespectful Jehovah's Witnesses insert that divine name into the New Testament as well, despite having zero warrant for that insertion. But also translated as Lord, largely out of respect for folks who think that those all too frequent repetitions of Yahweh might be using the name in vain. Sort of like those insincere that we often get to hear so frequently. However, those original were totally respectful and totally appropriate. Incidentally, it was that highly respectful tradition of using the alternate word Lord that von Bodisen and Dahlman studied extensively. A work that Estelt summarized, and from that summarized concluded that Israel used that more respectful Adonai epithet early on in their history. Whatever that early on actually means. How is that for helpful? However, that uppercase I am is undoubtedly the same I am referent that Jesus used so sparingly. Sparingly using that divine name to instruct folks on exactly who he was, is, and is to come, and exactly what he had come to earth for the glory of himself. Except that the New Testament instructing was now in the common Greek, was now following the language of the Septuagint, was now in the language that Jesus quoted the majority of the time, and quoted liberally, as well as literally. A name fully accessible to all of us Gentiles now, accessible in an internal rather than an external sense. Accessible in a recognition sense rather than in a sorcery sense. Which seems to be the case for the fake translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, with their sorcerers replacing the word Lord with Jehovah. Now, according to a certain GG, the early church martyrs were just too afraid to write the actual divine name. A cultic argument from silence, a deafening silence that Miles Jones is now supposedly uncovering with some newly found Hebrew Gospels, New Testament Gospels that include the name. In the meantime, though, we have a deafening silence, despite GG claiming that both John and Paul actually wrote the magical Yahweh in their manuscripts. That being said, GG must have some even earlier manuscripts than either CSNTM or NTTR and Munster have. GG must have some pretty super solid first century manuscripts that we are completely unaware of. So perhaps GG should release those manuscripts in order to justify his cult's constant assertion of Jehovah, right? All that silence aside, what we have in our rock above, with all due respect to Scott Stippling, is what appears to be our earliest inscription of the divine name to date. Our earliest inscription of the complete divine name. You see, Scott's incomplete Yahweh engraved in lead doesn't really count. As cool as that respectful shorthand really is. Sorry about that, Scotty. However, Moses was told to proclaim and propagate the complete and proper name of God, a name that Yahweh gave to himself. It's not like that name was given to him by anyone else, right? And it was that specific name that Moses was told to propagate at that pivotal time. No shorthand would have been endorsed by Yahweh. Vocalizing a mere Yah to Pharaoh and to his fellow Hebrews would have been both incomprehensible and reprehensible. Vocalizing a lame eternal, if he has sent me, truth came to Pharaoh? What does that even mean? Huh? An indistinct force with zero personality has sent me? A force that could just as easily change its trajectory? That could just as easily change its fuzzy mind? Just how stable does that sound to you, huh? Rather, that unchanging personality actually told Moses that he was to publicize the complete and proper name. Publicize it to the Hebrew fathers as well as to that bull-worshipping Pharaoh. To publicize it audibly as well as epigraphically. To publicize it with more than measly consonants. It would be utterly unintelligible and incoherent otherwise. And if this ancient rock of ours is any indication of that publicizing, it seems that Moses was moderately successful at it. That is, until some presumably pious Hebrews decided that the name was much too holy to audibly say. Sad. And as a result, those pseudo-pious Hebrews supposedly substituted a diminished Lord instead. Something that looks and sounds so radically different from Yahweh. However, right around the time of our awesome eulogy, he commanded the fathers to propagate the proper name, even to their children. And from the looks of our present artifact, it appears as if those fathers did just that, even to the point of propagating the proper vowel pointings at that point in time. Wow. Promoting a Lord fully manifested in Exodus 34. Promoting a forgiving Lord according to Cyril's. And you just gotta love that full manifestation. Indeed, welcome to the gospel of grace, folks. A good news that many will not see. Despite all that, if you're really intent on anglicizing the tetragram and really intent on promoting a radically different gospel, then you might possibly postulate the name Jehovah from that Hellenistic history of ours, from that Phoenician history of ours, with those corresponding vowels simply being guessed at, with those sketchy E, O, and A vowels then being articulated at the very great risk of mispronunciation, at the very great risk of offending someone very, very powerful, offending someone who made himself perfectly clear, especially clear on the gospel, especially clear on the nature of grace. Yet, having postulated those scurrilous vowels above, those consonants of theirs are also scurrilous. You see, there never was a Hebrew J. Not then, at any rate. And the W was an actual W back then. No doubt about it. The W was not changed to a until several centuries later. And even then, that awkward V was nuanced by a horizontal line above it in order to indicate a B sound, supposedly. To indicate a B sound as a Baba, black sheep, by the ancient Samaritans. For sound more like Jehovah now, making the final H of the divine name superfluous now. So now you have earned a perfectly good tetragram. Congratulations. Knowing the above, just how confident are you, JWs, about your pronunciation now? Now that we have just eliminated your two primary consonants as contenders. Are you willing to change your denomination's name yet? Willing to change your initials to YWs? Or YBs? Or better yet, change your miserable translations altogether? Not bloody likely, huh? Too bad. Not to be left unsaid, there is absolutely zero magical power in that Kabbalistic practice of saying the name. Even if you happen to pronounce the name properly. No, contrary to the words of word faith preachers, those are merely words. Words often used in vain. That is called the occult, folks. And you really don't want to go there. Not like King Saul did. No, those word faith preachers seem to be taking our following verse a little too literally. Then everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved, for there will be an escape for those on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, as the Lord promised. Among the survivors, the Lord calls. However, that is another time and place, dear preachers. That is an end times prophecy being addressed. That is not the here and certainly not the now. Plus, this is calling on rather than a calling out. Incidentally, we should probably call out the CSB on this as well. Since in the above we see that even the uber literal CSB is being radically inconsistent with their own use of the name, using it in a prescriptive and then a descriptive sense. Being doubly inconsistent in substituting Lord for Yahweh a couple of times there, within the very same verse even, contrary to our very best manuscripts at the present moment. A sad translation compromising the very promise, as well as compromising the very calling of Yahweh. Yes, he does the calling, folks. Compromising the very particular calling that precedes and then proceeds with his drawing us to him. A sad translation, granting far too much power to the scurrilous pronunciation of a name, a God-binding sorcery.